So sin, what would be the equivalent of sin within New Age?
It's an illusion. Sin is a no word. Sin is basically a word made up by fundamental Christians. Many others can agree.
Okay. So in a way, I mean, pedantically, all words are made up words. That's just trivially true. But in within the New Age movement, if you wanted to say that sin is a word that's made up by fundamentalist Christians, or at least made up by monotheist religions who feel like that there is a God against whom you can have a transgression, that is a word that comes from those theistic traditions. So in a way, that is not really wrong for someone who's a New Ager and doesn't necessarily have that educated to classify sin as a word that you Christians use as a means of guilt and control, or at least to define how you should or should not behave. I think that's actually reasonable. They don't think it's reasonable, but I think it is, even in my old Christian. If I had a Christian hat, I should probably get a Christian hat for the show. A hat that says Christian on it that I can put on when I'm talking as my former self. I think Shannon and Matt have those. Anyway.
On different levels of this, but sin is a bad word made up by Christians to make you feel guilty. There is no sin.
There it is again. Bad word made up by Christians to feel guilty. So I don't think it was made up to make you feel guilty. I don't think that was the point of it. It was actually to describe something phenomenon that they were noticing or seeing, or at least inventing. I don't think that was the motivation, was to feel guilt, but certainly it was utilized such. And that was a part of my religious trauma, certainly comes from using guilt as a weapon. And I feel like churches and my community that I was in certainly used guilt, and I hear that's true of Catholics, as a weapon that became particularly used to just have people fall in line. Guilt, which is essentially describing our conscience, telling us that we've behaved in ways that are perhaps inconsistent with what our ethics and highest ideals would be. When we feel those feelings, the church likes to grab those feelings and really twist them and make that a very wide net so that they can indeed define behaviors beyond what we might otherwise consider to be things that are deserving of guilt. So again, I am actually weirdly on board with these New Agers, if that's their definition of sin.
It's an illusion because humans are inherently good. We are all good.
That's how
That's where I would depart, that humans are all necessarily good. Again, we would define good or bad. So this is something I've been encouraging lately in my videos and my streams. When people say good or bad, I think we all instinctively feel like we're talking about the same thing, but I like to push back, and I would encourage you to push back. When someone uses the word good or bad, just ask them, hey, what do you mean by good or bad? Because I definitely didn't think about it. I just ran with my instinct and what other people made me feel. And again, guilt is part of it. But if you have someone sit down and just pause for a minute and reflectively think, hey, what is good or what is bad? I think you can get some more interesting and introspective conversations and maybe find some common ground and realize where you do have common ground or where you don't. If you can just first define that.
they view the Christian idea.
Oh, so sorry. So if you're going to ask, are people inherently good or are people inherently bad? Well, we need to know what that means. And if it is defined as something along the lines of thoughts or actions that align with outcomes that I prefer, which actually tends to be what most people, if they're honest with themselves, mean by good, then yeah, that's a good instinct. Most of us do act in our own self-interest, and we act towards the things that we prefer, and we act towards our own desired outcomes. That's just a natural thing we do. So when you define good that way, it's pretty easy to say, yeah, you can say that humans are inherently good. If you want to say bad is the actions or behaviors or thoughts that are detrimental to others, that cause suffering, that increase suffering, that reduce flourishing, then again, we all do things that for other people, and sometimes even for ourselves, and we'll get into that later, we also perform actions that are counter to those ideal outcomes. So it's actually not as simple as this good or bad. This is clearly, if you think about it, a spectrum where an action might fall. And so it's arbitrarily saying, is the world black or is the world white? Well, honestly, most of the time, the world, if we're still shooting in black and white photography, almost the whole world exists in that gray area. And you'd have to tell us what the spectrum is. So anyway, these are, whether it's a New Ager or a Christian, these are good questions to ask if you want to probe and be philosophical about what's the nature of humanity.
Sin that
Oh, no. They completely think that is the Christian view of sin. So there is no willingness on their part. There's no willingness in a lot of their parts to even understand the fundamental, the orthodox view of Christianity.
Okay, so that was the end that cut off there. There is no desire of the people to look into what Christian orthodoxy actually is. Now, this is, on one hand, a fair criticism. I would say that people don't go out of their way a lot of times to steel man other people's worldviews or to really dig into the trenches of what other people's worldviews are. They get the high level, and if it's something that doesn't seem compatible with their perception of reality, then they probably don't delve too deep. Interestingly, though, I did delve deep into Christianity, and I'm still constantly, well, you don't accept orthodoxy, you don't know what orthodoxy is. And of course, what's hilarious from an outsider perspective is that every Christian in the world thinks that they are orthodox. They think that what they believe about Christianity is the correct way. That's just the way things, if you thought you were not correct, you would change your view. The whole idea of Christian orthodoxy, true Scotsman fallacy, all that kind of thing from an outsider perspective, is rather hilarious.